lending not so easy, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then if something goes wrong, what do? That's another skill set.
I would be very much in favor of there being some licensing requirement, even just so I had a better line of sight on what the size of that activity in the marketplace is.
Mm-hmm.
We get pretty good numbers from CBA and CMHC of, the volumes of the mortgage marketplace currently, but we have no real idea of how much private capital is slushing around. And some of the brokerage houses have told me that there's been tremendous growth in that across the last 3-5 years. I think when I started, people used to tell me it was around 5 or 6% of the transaction. Now I've heard numbers as high as 11 or 12%. That's pretty staggering growth, and that kind of growth is going to attract more regulatory attention because
100%.
they're going to want to know what's happening so
Yeah.
that they can make appropriate policy decisions to stop the economy tanking because of some
Right.
systemic risk they didn't see. So as it becomes a larger and larger issue, it will attract greater and greater attention and will become regulated. I think it would be smart for the folks that are involved in that space to start thinking proactively about how they would like to see that regulation structured and take that to government, because if you don't tell them what it is that makes the most sense for you, government has a habit of telling you what they want instead.
That's right.
And it's usually not nearly as good.
Yeah, it's always better to be proactive.
It definitely is, yeah.
And then MPC has their own economist, and he's great. I read his stuff all the time, and I agree with a lot of the stuff he says.
He's a smart guy.
He is a smart guy, and I like the way he comes at things. Very user friendly, easy to read, very, very good.
Yeah.
What do you think about when CMHC came out at the beginning of the pandemic, said losses, values could drop up to 18%? What did you think about that?
So contextually for me, Evan Siddle used to work at the Bank of Canada under Mark Carney during the financial crisis. And I feel like he is very battle scarred from that, and he is hyper attuned and sensitive to potential price reductions. So I think he sees it almost as his role to warn people as much as he can that buying a home is not a slam dunk investment that's going to make you 15% year over year. Prices do fall once in a while.
Right.
And make sure that you're making the purchase not for the investment potential, but because your lifestyle is dependent upon the choice that you're making. To be fair, in April, there was something like 2.5 million people unemployed in the space of 30 days, and the stock market sank about a third of its value. So when we weren't really sure what was going, or how businesses were going to prepare, there was a really pessimistic sentiment, I think, that there's an awful lot of people that have lost income, that have got mortgage obligations they're not going to be able to service. When the deferral programs were introduced, they were supposed to be just for the folks that have been financially impacted, but poor media reporting about mortgage holidays made everybody feel like that they were eligible, which is why we got the number of people taking part of those that did. And so I just don't think that any of the regulators or the government had any comparative experience to be able to make accurate predictions about how we were going to unravel this mess of 1 in 8 people having their mortgage paid for by the government currently. So I do have to cut them some slack there. Hindsight is always much clearer than predictions are always wrong. But I do think we've seen about a 10, depends who you're listening to, but somewhere between an 8 and a 10% appreciation in market values across the last 12 months. CMHC's kind of best case scenario was 9% down. So that's a 20% absolute value difference in results from expectation. Right. And I would suggest 10 to 15% of that difference is thanks to government support.
I don't agree.
Okay.
And I'll tell you why. First
Sure.
of all, I think you have to you have to say things a certain way, because you don't want to stick CMHC in the eye with your finger, right? So I said very early on in the pandemic, and I'm actually on record saying it to investors in my letters to investors and everything, right at the beginning, I said, as soon as he came out with that, and I think I was reported in the Globe saying I completely disagreed with what he said. I said it was fear-mongering. And I said, if you look at the data, which I assume they do, because they probably have way more data than I do because I'm just Nick sitting in my office. Um, if you looked at the vast majority of people that had their income disrupted were basically low income, minimum wage. I think something like 32% were minimum
Hospitality.
wage.
Yeah.
The next 30% was minimum wage plus $1 or something.
Yeah.
And when you broke down those, restaurant workers, all service industry, right? So then when you break down that group again, the vast majority of those people were renters. They weren't homeowners, right? So I felt very early on what was going to happen was these people that were renting in condos and things of that nature, they were either going to start doubling up, taking on roommates and stuff,
Yeah.
or just move back with family, right? So I said, there's going to be a high vacancy rate in condos. The good news is most of the units were bought pre-construction at $400, $500, $600 a foot.
Right.
The condos are selling between $1,000 and $1,100 in the city. I could see them dropping off to $850. They're still good. No, it's not going to be a bloodbath. They just don't make as much, right? And different people have different staying power. I said homes under $1 million. I said they're going to be hot at these rates. There's never a better time to buy. At these rates, every time you make a mortgage payment, 52% goes off your principal. When rates are 6-7%, you take a 25-year AM, 5 years go by, you paid $1,000 off, right? Like there's never been a better time. That's why the market has been going crazy, right? So for them to miss the mark so poorly, right? Like to miss it that badly when the data was all there. And then they kept doubling down on it. Like it was like they were trying to fearmonger to make it happen, it felt like. That's how it felt for just a person reading it. And I talked to a lot of people with mortgages, and I always said to them, if you don't mind me asking, did you defer your mortgage payments? Right? And they were working, right? And they said, yeah, because I saw this was a way to pay off my credit card debt, renovate my home. Like it was cheap money. Like
For sure.
It's easier than borrowing the money because, sure, I understand that I've extended my amortization. Like they're not dummies, but they saw the value in redirecting those funds elsewhere.
Yeah, it's a 6-month refi really for free.
Yeah. No cost, no aggravation, no nothing, and then you could pay off your credit card debt that you're paying 20% on, or finish your basement, or do whatever you want, right?
Yeah.
I saw it as all positive for a lot of people.
So I don't disagree with anything you've just said, but the initial predictions when they were made, I do got to give them a bit of credit. They did, I agree with you. They really doubled down on statements though, and Evan Siddle actually made some testimony to the Standing Committee of Finance in August timeframe. There were, 1 in 8 people were in a deferral at the time. He suggested as many as 1 in 5 could, and 20% of people would have to default on their mortgage come the end of the deferral cliff. Was really exaggerated rhetoric, and I'm not sure where that came from. I know that it's his job to be risk-focused and prudent, but he also probably underestimated the fear that statements from him in that role can create in the marketplace. I'm glad that we've seen, it depends how you look at this. It's a little unfortunate actually that they were quite as vocal, because they've lost quite a lot of credibility given how inaccurate their predictions have been across the last little while. Which honestly will probably serve us well when we're having our own discussions with the government and we're making recommendations for alternate policy types, because they've had a very strong voice. Evan Siddle and the former finance minister Bill Monroe were quite close personal friends, so there was an awful lot of influence exerted there over housing policy in Canada, probably far less so now. I mean, I can't see the numbers coming down now. There was a big miss on sentiment in those projections, I think, given that. So I'm a bit of a case study. I lived in a 600 square foot condominium right downtown until about 3 months ago. I generally travel quite a lot, as you know. I would see you in various parts of the country as you were at trade shows and other things, just building business. When I was only in my condo a week a month, didn't matter.
Yeah.
Didn't care about the space. When I was locked in it for 3 months straight,
All of a sudden you
I
care.
was like pouring hemlock in my ear, really. So people need to get out. If you're locked in a space, you have a psychological reevaluation of
What's
is my
important.
quality of life.
Yeah, what's important.
And that's definitely caused an issue. And there are competing strains on this, and you can see it in the real estate market. There are people clamoring to get out of the city into space that's a little larger and more affordable, quote unquote, but also has some space to create an office so you can actually work in your home. But then you've got some of the folks who are a little bit older living in those established homes that don't want to sell, that aren't interested in listing. To your point, they've only sold a property probably 3 times in their life, and all they can envision is a army of 400 people traipsing through, even if it's a multiple offer situation. Everybody's got the plague.
Yeah.
People coming into my house now.
Right.
So we've got these historically low listings with dramatic number of people
Demand.
looking for the
Yeah.
next thing, which is why I think Bank of Canada Governor very appropriately is saying there's not thruff in the market. This is absolute pure demand. People are not looking to make speculative purchases even though prices are high.
Yeah.
They
How many
want it
people
for
are buying
themselves.
rentals? The rentals you're looking at now are people that bought them pre-construction, right? Like now it's come, the closing time's coming. They bought them 3 years ago or more.
Right.
You know what I mean? Like, I think that when I worked at financial institutions, at the end of every year we had to do this stress test that we had to submit to OSFI, right? And you had to put in all these different models of various stress tests, right? Like if values dropped 25%, if rates went up 200 basis points in a day, and then there was about 7 stress tests that you did, right? And the last one you did was, what would it take to break you, like to put you under, right? So you basically throw everything in there and say, okay, at this we're broken, right? So you knew what your bar was that broke you.
Yeah.
So you could always work backwards to see how close you were to going under. So I understood when they came out with the 18%, that was probably number 7 in all the stress tests they did, right? But my attitude is communicate that. Go, we did various stress tests. The worst case scenario, if this happens, this is probably going to be the outcome. The chances of all of those stars lining up and happening are pretty slim. And here are the reasons why we think that, and then talk about the who lost their jobs and what's going on and the low interest rates, right? Like soften it or make it so it's understandable where people say, okay, that's the worst case scenario, but odds are that's not going to happen, right?
So I agree with you on a personal level on that, but I don't think that philosophically that aligns with Evan Siddle's perspective of his responsibility to the market. He would see himself as having to decry a bit of a warning if he really believed that there was going to be a reduction. Yeah,
but I agree you put out the warning, but it's the way there's warning and then there's fear mongering to try and make something happen, right? Like, trust me, if you look at Donald Trump created a riot, right? You got all these people believing in nonsense, right? Like, you can create fear mongering. So when somebody has a senior job like that, it's not hard to create fear mongering. Do you know what I mean? Because they've got a big voice with a lot of influence, right? So you have to be, aware of your voice in those cases, right? And it did rattle things at the beginning. People were nervous, thinking the market was going to crash, right? People go, "Oh, I'm going to wait and buy a house for 20% less," and I used to say, some people ask me, I said, that's not going to happen. Like, if you're going to buy now. Right?
For sure.
So that was a bit disappointing.
So, agreed. But the media also, they don't do a good job of presenting that stuff the right way either. And
because they love to fearmonger too.
They do.
So what do you think about, what's your view on this move to the suburbs or out of the city? What do you think, what's your view on that?
I don't think it's a surprise. If you were living downtown in the past, you were paying a premium for a lifestyle. Restaurants and live music and...
Well, close to work though,
they're all closed now.
Yeah.
And close to work, yeah. So everything was a convenience and a lifestyle. Why would you pay that premium if you don't get any of those benefits anymore? And you're restricted to a smaller area because the price per square foot was very high comparatively to other areas. So I'm not surprised people have left. It'll be interesting to see at what speed the recall to the office takes place. Because to me, that's the thing that's going to determine what's going to happen to house prices in the horseshoe. If Scotiabank decides that, if I pick an arbitrary date, January 2nd, 2022 is the date that everybody comes back to the office full-time, 5 days a week, there's going to be a pretty busy fall, and there's going to be a lot of inventory in the Golden Horseshoe as people are coming back to the city. But I suspect what's more likely to happen is there's going to be a transition back to a 1 day, 2 day, 3 day, 4 day work week, which will take place across probably 9 to 12 months. And you might see a stalling of appreciation, but I'll bet you if you're in Kitchener right now, just asking for a pause for 12 months in house prices is probably going to be a welcome relief. So I also think that policymakers will be hyper attuned to, given where interest rates are, they don't want anybody to be underwater in the event, because they're only going to go up when the economy does actually start to climb back. They don't want anybody to feel squeezed, given the billions of dollars of support that they've outlaid already.
I just read a book recently on pandemics, and it talked about pandemics basically since ancient Greek times.
Yeah.
And it's always the same. Like, there's always the non-believers. Like,
Right.
you know, it's unbelievable
Yeah,
how
many
things
things
never
change.
change over thousands of years. People are still the same.
Yeah.
But, you know, the mass exodus out of the urban areas, and then the roll back in. And I think that
We're social creatures, right?
that's right. Like, who wants to
We're
be in?
supposed
You
to
know, I
be-
read this article a couple of months ago about this young couple that, you know, they lived in the city, and they saw this opportunity to buy. They never thought they'd ever be able to buy a house, but they bought this house out in the Maritimes on a lake, and they go, we never thought we would buy. And they took a picture of them. This was, I think, the only house on this lake. This lake wasn't very large,
Wow.
and they were all alone. The two of them. They go, oh, this is so wonderful. I thought 2 years they'll be divorced, and it'll take 15 years to sell that place.
Right.
Like, you're gonna lose your mind. The two of you in the middle of
Underwriting 101
nowhere.
for the agents out there.
You're
You need
in
an
the
exit
middle
strategy.
exactly. That's my whole premise on my underwriting exit strategy. I always say
Who's gonna buy this when they
bad
don't want
things
it
happen to
anymore?
good people. They get sick, they lose their jobs, they die, they get divorced. Stuff happens, right? Let me tell you, two people from the city, from an urban suburban area, moving out to the bush because they want to own a home so bad, all alone. Like, let's. I wish we could interview them right now with all the snow we've got. I'd love to be a fly on the wall in that house. Like, they're probably like ready to kill each other.
I just want to go to a restaurant again.
Oh.
I want to eat a meal I didn't have to cook for myself.
I miss
I want to go
restaurants so
to
much.
see 6 of my friends and not have to go to the LCBO first. But, like, I just want to go with a credit card and know that everything will be taken care of because I've got some cash.
And you know what else I find? You know, there's some restaurants that I really like, and then we've done takeout,
Yeah.
and it's just not as
not
good.
the same.
Now I know it's the ambiance, the mood, somebody serving you,
It's fresh.
and it's fresher.
20 minutes in a car.
Like
it's not
some
the
of these
same
people,
meal.
they just give you more volume of food. I don't need to get fatter. I just want to have a nice
You run a
eating
running group
experience.
every Saturday night.
That's right, exactly. I think the companies will start weaning people back into the city, and I think it
for
won't
sure
be
they
like
will.
you said. I don't think they're going to say everybody back on X date and have this mass, you know,
For
sound.
some they will. I think depending on where
Yeah,
you
but
are
I think
within
they'll
the
try to
pecking order.
gradualize it because I think that, you know, it's like the frog in the pot. You know, the frog
Yeah,
in the pot. You turn up
very
the
much.
heat, they don't know they're going to
Yeah.
die.
You boil them slowly.
You bore them slowly, right? I think that's what people also they're going to be. Oh my God, I'm commuting an hour and a half, 2 hours a day. This sucks.
Yeah, right.
You know, so it'll be a gradual thing because I've commuted for years. I live in the city now, but I commuted for 17 years, 90 minutes each way.
Yeah.
Like
Brutal.
it wears on
I
you.
did that for a long time too.
Like once you get into your 40s, it's hard. That's what I found. 20s and
That's
30s,
true.
no problem. When I got in my
Yeah,
40s,
that's fair.
you start getting tired.
So I think that aligns for me too, actually.
Yeah,
You
you don't have
take
this.
the GO train in from basically Oakville and then the subway up to Eglinton every day, and that was like a 90-minute cycle.
It's hard.
Yeah.
It's exhausting, right? And it's quality of life.
Mhm.
Like you leave the house at 5:30, 6 in the morning, you get home at 7, like that sucks.
It's not good.
It's no way to live. So my other question was, and this will be my last question, if you could make, any change you wanted in the mortgage industry today, what would it be?
If I had my absolute druthers,
You were the emperor of the mortgage industry.
right? If I could just wave my hand and make it so, I think we have an overly complex system of regulation because we have so many layers of government in Canada. In the UK, there is one conduct authority and there is one prudential regulator. In Australia, there is one conduct authority and there is one prudential regulator. And so if they need to make a policy change, there doesn't need to be coordination between the municipalities and then the province and then the Fed, and there's not finger pointing about who owns what responsibility or where. It's much simpler for them to start thinking holistically about policy change. For things as simple as, can we provide a land transfer tax credit? Could we make premiums for mortgage insurance tax deductible? Could we, as soon as you start laying policy questions on the table to potentially assist would-be first-time buyers, you realize, well, that's actually not OSFI's, that's not a CMHC thing. So the provincial government, now I got to talk to the regional municipality about it, and it gets really complicated trying to find solve all solutions. If we could amalgamate somehow into national regulators for both conduct and for solvency and prudential oversight, that would make, it's very selfish, but it would make my job a whole lot easier.
Oh, it would make everything run so much better. Because when you have it all broken down like that, like I always say, nobody gets fired for saying no. Right. So you get a lot of no's because nobody wants to get fired. Right. So like I think that would be, I'm totally in support of that, but I don't think that's going to be ever happening in our lifetime.
To be fair, the provincial regulators through MBRCC are really doing their best to try to streamline and harmonize things. They've had reciprocal agreements in place for labour mobility and that stuff for a while. But their sandbox and just the financial spread, if you will, of where money goes through real estate transactions and trying to support would-be first-time buyers in a meaningful, coordinated fashion is becoming more and more challenging. There are some supporters of would-be first-time buyers. There are others that are not at all. And I really do think long-term, our economy is only going to survive if we have an appropriate spread of wealth through society. If we have too concentrated a distribution, it's not good for us at all. So because of that, and given that the security and the forced savings that a mortgage provides, it just feels like the right thing to do. I
think the house is, for the most people, that's their retirement. There's nothing more important. Like when they say, oh, you'd be better off renting and then putting money in investments. The reality is people aren't that disciplined. That's the reality. And then the second thing is, what do you invest in?
What lender is going to give you a 95% loan to value to put in the stock market when you're 25?
Yeah.
So you're not going to get, it's disingenuous to say that you get the same return.
I completely agree. I think home ownership is the best thing that anybody can do for retirement, for long term, for peace of mind, for security, everything. So I personally think you've done a great job with MPC. You've got members involved, the government involved. I think you've done a really good job. Even though, like, I disagree with you a lot of stuff, I still think you're doing a great job. And I appreciate you coming to talk to us today. And if you wanted to say anything before we wrap up, you can.
Only thanks. I appreciate the conversation. I think the association is in really good stead, but I think there's an awful lot of volunteers that have contributed to the government relations effort. So it's not just me. And we have I'm super fortunate with the staff that we have at the association. I have very strong professionals in events and education. My CFO is incredibly strong. So
I've dealt with some of the event people. They've been great.
Good. I agree with you. Yeah, we've got a great team. I'm really lucky.
Oh, that's good. Well, you've done a great job with it. So thanks again for coming down. Appreciate it.